meeting a diversity of housing needs for seniors, for downsizers, for baby boomers, for millennials, affordable housing, and housing for special needs is a high priority of the Medfield community and is being reflected in the development of this final plan. In this interview, I interview Andre LeRoux, who is the Executive Director of the Smart Growth Alliance. In this program, Andre talks about multi-uses for the property, not just for housing, but for commercial, retail, arts and culture. He also talks about important demographic trends and how that's affecting the needs in the community. One of the things that Andre talks about that we think is particularly interesting is you should visualize this development through the eyes of a person that lives there or a person visiting there. It's the beauty of the location, the architectural design, the landscape design, the cultural activity, the activities, the diversity of people living in the community, and the multi-vibrance that you have as a sense in living in that location. And this is the next in the series of our programs about the Medfield State Hospital and the master planning process that we're going through. And today we have a very interesting discussion on smart growth and housing. And with me today is Andre LeRoux, who is the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance. And welcome for being on this program. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Gil.
It's a pleasure to have Andre here and to talk to us about some of the issues at Medfield State Hospital and the planning process, some of the interesting trends that we see in demographics in the area, and then to come away at the end with some suggestions about our planning process. So Andre, to start, maybe you could just give us a little bit of background about what the Smart Growth program is.
Sure. Well, thanks first of all for having me here today, Gil. It was great. I got to speak to the advisory committee of the town for the state hospital redevelopment project a couple of months ago, and so it's great to be back and talk a little bit about these concepts so the rest of the town can hear about them too. Mm-hmm. When we talk about smart growth, we're really talking about a quality of life, and we're talking about creating diverse opportunities for people in their communities around housing, around transportation, ways of getting around, in terms of jobs and education and retail opportunities. So it's really, the notion, it goes back to what we used to think of as a village, the traditional New England village or community. In order to have a successful community, you need to have people from all generations, young people, families, older folks, and you also you need to have things for them to do in terms of working, in terms of places for them to live, and opportunities to get ahead in life. So and recreational opportunities, no doubt, too.
Yeah, and you mentioned the different segments, you know, the different aspects of our community. And I think one of the things that would be helpful is to just describe or define what we mean by baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, millennials, senior citizens, just to give everybody kind of a common set of terms or definitions for what we mean by these segments.
Yeah, it's very interesting what's happening in the United States and obviously in Massachusetts in terms of our demographic shifts and the way that our real estate market is shifting in response to those changes in population. So the baby boomers, historically the largest generation of our society, they are getting older and they are looking for new kinds of places to live. So we're talking generally, you know, they're entering retirement age, they're 55 plus, it's a new phase of their lives, their kids have generally moved out, and many of them are looking to downsize. And so they've been in large single-family homes for the most part as a generation, and now they want to stay active longer than ever before, and they want to be close to opportunities to walk around and do activities, be close to their friends, be close to their family, their children, but they don't want to take care of large lawns, right? And they want to have a more modest living spaces, and we don't have enough housing for them right now. Then there's the Generation X, which is my generation, and this is, I have 2 kids, 14 and 11, and this is really the kind of the school-age family demographic. And it's actually a smaller demographic than it has been in the past, because it's smaller than the baby boomer generation, and also smaller than the generation that comes after it, which is Generation Y, or what's commonly referred to as the millennials. And the millennials are those young professionals. They're just starting to generate their own households, right? So they're moving out of their families' homes, and oftentimes they're living on their own, or as couples, or with roommates, and overwhelmingly they're looking for different kinds of things than past generations have. Rather than finding a job and then living near that job, they're actually looking at communities first and looking at the quality of life of those communities. And so they're finding some place to live where they want to live, and then they're looking for jobs. They're also increasingly, they're living independently longer, right? Living on their own longer, and they also, as a result, they want smaller living spaces, right? Where they can have sort of single household living quarters.
Millennials, because these are people who were born before 2000, is that why we call them millennials?
Yes, exactly. They're at that age right now where they're graduating from high school, or they're into college, or they're in their 20s, and they're just starting that household formation. And one thing that's really important to understand about this shift is that they're actually a larger generation even than the baby boomers. And they are, as a result, when you look at the baby boomer generation being so large, and they're looking to downsize and move into new housing types, you look at the millennial generation being so large, and they're looking for new housing types. As a country, 90% of the new households that are being formed are single-person households. And historically, those are not the kinds of homes that we have been developing. Even if Massachusetts were to keep the same population that it's had, we would still need in the area of tens of thousands of more housing units, but smaller housing units, apartments.
Now, there's another segment too, right? I would put myself more into the senior resident or senior citizen community, which is important here in Medfield.
Yeah, absolutely. And that segment of the community requires different services, I think continual care in some cases, but at the same time, seniors don't want to be isolated from the community. Increasingly, people are staying active longer. I know you're very active too, and an outdoorsman yourself, and so we see that we need to figure out how to do better at making multi-generational communities.
So at Medfield State Hospital, I mean, would one of the ideas be to actually try to provide, a diversity of housing that can meet all of these different segments, but integrated together in some way?
Yeah, the way that I like to think about it is that, the state hospital had a past that was sort of from a different era. It was really a different era when folks who had mental illness were meant to be isolated and not to be seen, and that's why it was
cities, crowded, compact industrial cities like Boston at the time, and people wanted to get out of that. People that wanted to get out into the rural, more natural environment, out of the cities.
Right. Well, and that's why Medfield has attracted the population that it's had, but the state hospital was really set apart. And what needs to happen is to kind of reintegrate that complex of buildings back into the community and reconnect it back to the existing neighborhoods that Medfield has. And so, we can look to our own history in New England and look at the New England Village for some inspiration, where you have a small village, but it's walkable, it's compact, and it has a range of housing and different kinds of amenities for all people of all ages.
And I think for myself too, I love the idea of living with a diverse population, you know, of
Yeah.
young families, of individual professionals,
Yeah.
other senior people that like to get out and do stuff, you know, with the environment or the river, that type of thing. So I love the idea of integrating this together in some sort of a, you know, pleasant campus setting.
Yeah, and families are changing too, and increasingly grandparents are participating more in raising their grandchildren.
Right.
And I think that we need to create opportunities for different kinds of families, multi-generational families, to be together.
Excellent. Now, I noticed one of the things, I was looking at some of the demographic statistics for this area.
Yeah.
I was looking at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council statistics. And
Yeah.
one of the things that really comes out of that when you look at the Medfield population is that you have out-migration, and particularly very noticeable in two segments.
Yeah.
One is the sort of the younger people in college or getting out of college and starting their careers, that segment, and the other is in the baby boomers and the older people,
Yes.
and the senior citizens.
Yeah.
And there seems to be, from the statistics that I've seen, a real trend for those people leaving the area. What do you think is going on there in those two groups?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you look at the statistics for Medfield over the last couple of decades, you see it's people my age, Generation Xers with children that have been moving in, because that's really the housing stock that's here in Medfield, is sort of larger homes that can accommodate children. And however, you're losing both seniors and really in particular your younger people who are, you know, going to college, or they're moving into jobs, or they're starting their own families, and they can't stay anymore. And that's it's related to a couple of things. First of all, it's related to their preferences. As I mentioned before, millennials, I think something like 80% of millennials would prefer to live in a walkable urban environment. And then when I say urban environment, I don't necessarily mean they want to move to the big city, but they want to be in places where they can live and work, they can go to a cafe, they can be near friends and other people their age. There are things to do. They want that exciting environment. And so, you know, most suburban communities, including Medfield, don't have a lot of places to offer that population. And one of the big challenges that I think suburban communities have nowadays is to figure out how to create those little nodes. I mean, you've got a great town center, Medfield Town Center. You've started to do that. You have the library, you have the plaza, you have a little park, you have a supermarket, you have town hall, you have some shops. You got a great cluster there. And that's you need to build on that, and you need to create maybe one or two other places in town, and the State Hospital Complex I think represents a great chance to do that.
One of the things that you've mentioned, I know, in some of the things you've written, and when you came and met with our committee for the planning, was a group called Pioneers.
Yeah.
And you know, it sounds like the Wild West or something, you know. But what do you mean by pioneer? Are there pioneers around now?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say in real estate terms, a pioneer group is one that goes into an unestablished market or a weak market and really makes that market work. So, for example, you might see it in some of the old mill towns or mill cities that we have in New England that have beautiful building stock, but you know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of square feet. A lot of it's just being used for warehousing. And so the ways that they've been able to come back has been to make it attractive for pioneers like artists, you know, outdoorsy people, artisans, craftspeople, to come in and really use that space. So a lot of live workspace, for example, is emblematic
like artist
of these
studios, for example,
Absolutely.
where people live in you know, have a condominium or an apartment, but then they work in maybe another space there, but do artistic work or music or something like that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the great thing about the State Hospital Complex, for example, is that because it is a little isolated, it's surrounded by hundreds of acres of conservation land and trails, and it's right near the Charles River. There's the new park being developed there with the kayak and canoe landing. I think that's going to attract another kind of pioneer, one that's really geared towards the outdoor lifestyle. And so if you kind of think of the artisan pioneers, and you think of the arts people, and you think of those outdoor recreation pioneers, those are potential markets for you that could those are the kinds of people that would be willing to come into some place that's not yet established and begin to create a funky community.
Another thing that we talk a lot about in our planning committee has been addressing a lot is affordability. You know, affordability, and we've often thought that there's really two types of affordability. There's what we you know, call affordability from the state law perspective, from the 40B perspective, but then there's also just the ability for people to get into this expensive market here, you know, to buy a house, or buy a condominium in this area where the, you know, where the average prices are very high. And I wonder if you could comment just on what you think of as affordability.
Well, that's right. I think that when I think of the larger forces in the market, you look at Metro Boston, we're one of the most expensive housing markets in the whole country. And that's not going to get better anytime soon because we're just not building enough housing to meet the demand, particularly because of these demographic changes that I was mentioning. We've done a pretty good job as a region of building large homes on large lots, and Medfield has a lot of those kinds of homes and the surrounding communities as well. But where we've done poorly is that we've underbuilt, underproduced apartments. We've underproduced small single-family homes that are accessible to new families starting out, which you call starter homes, that are at a price point that people earlier in their careers can afford. And as a result, we're seeing a really dysfunctional housing market. So places that have good transportation access, that have exciting, vibrant communities around them, places like Cambridge, parts of Boston, Somerville, places like that are doing extraordinarily well. They're off the charts. And other places are maybe not doing quite as well. They're losing parts of their community that they would like to keep. Or, you know, the prices are going through the roof. So to the extent that we can create more community assets and mix that with some smaller unit types so that older people that want to downsize can stay in the community, so that people's children who grew up in the community and want to stay can also afford to stay somewhere. Those are the kinds of units we really need.
Now, do you see, I mean, we have, I don't know, something like 34 buildings up at the hospital. You know, these were, you know, big brick structures that architecturally are very attractive in various states of, you know, structural soundness. And so probably all the buildings can't be preserved. But could some of these, you think, be preserved and meet some of the needs of these segments?
Yeah, I think so. You know, there's a couple things to keep in mind, though. It has to be viable for development, right? For investment to come in and be able to make a profit. That's what's going to cause investment to happen. So what's going to be there is going to be a blend of the old and the new. It's going to be we're not going to be able to keep all of those buildings, and I think people have to reconcile themselves to that fact. A lot of these buildings were built for another era, and they're not well designed for the kinds of things that I was just talking about. So maybe some of those buildings will be renovated, and there'll be additions, modern additions attached to them. Some of them may have to be demolished. Some of them may be able to be preserved in their current state, and that's going to be I think, an important part of the planning process to figure that out.
Or even some of them being combined together, linked together. You know, these are separate buildings, but to make it viable, it may be possible to tie several of the buildings together to make a viable living. One of the things I wanted to ask you about too is this concept of density, housing density. Everybody talks about housing density. And maybe you could just, first of all, give us kind of a definition of what we mean by housing density. What's high density, what's low density?
Right. Well, I actually don't like to use the word density too much. I like to use the word walkable, because it's fairly hard to picture different kinds of density. You could have something that's low density be very ugly and unattractive. You could have something that's high density be very attractive. And in fact, you know, many of these places where I said that real estate values are shooting through the roof are actually very high density places. But they're enjoyable to walk in. They have a good quality of life, and I think that should really be the focus. So, for example, you know, you have a great local example here, Old Village Square, where a local developer was able to create sort of a little mini village, what I like to term a pocket neighborhood. And so on what would ordinarily be just sort of 8 single-family home lots, there's actually 42 homes. So that's a great example of high density, but it's a density that adds value to the town, and it adds value to the neighborhood, and it has very high market demand, and they're filling right up. So if we could do more of that kind of density, that would be important.
And I see, you know, there's a very important, I guess you'd call it, value in Medfield that I think are shared by much of the population for preserving open space. You know, I mean, it's a very important, I think, fundamental value, why people moved out here, you know. And, you know, do you see that there's a connection, a relationship between, you know, these more compact neighborhoods or pocket neighborhoods and the idea of preserving open space?
You've hit on something very important. People react poorly to the idea of density because they think that it's going to mean a loss of what makes their town, their community special. They associate that with a loss of open space and special character. And what density can actually do is help preserve the character of that town. And again, if we look back to the historic town centers and villages of New England, those are compact forms, and they were surrounded by farms, they were surrounded by woodlands, and we can do the same thing here. You know, you definitely need, if you're going to have more people, you need to have better recreational facilities and more trails, and I think we can make better use of the land, access to the Charles River.
You have just watched one of 5 edited videos from past episodes of Our Town, Our Land, Our Future. We want to let you know that you can look forward to 2 brand new videos. The first one will talk about the rationale and the benefits of the final plan. The second will talk about what you can expect at special town meeting. For instance, you'll be voting on the zoning that will support the plan. As a way to stay in touch and informed as to what the Master Planning Committee is doing in this final stage, you can go to our Facebook page, we have a Twitter account, and we have a newsletter that goes out every week. So you can sign up for that through our Facebook or our website. Our website, www.mshvision.net, is a good resource. We hope you've enjoyed this video and the other videos in this series. Thank you.